Oh, Ampatuashte Medakuyepi. Wachiapiwi, Machiapi, Lena, Shichango Lakota, Imataha, Chante Washte Nape Chayuzapi, Wopila Taya Yahipi. Greetings, relatives. It's good day to all of you. My Lakota name, Wachiapiwi, means they depend on her. I'm a Shichango Lakota from the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. I'm currently serving as the president and CEO of the American Indian College Fund. So my English name is Cheryl Crazy Bull. I welcome you here today with a good heart and a handshake, and I thank you for joining us. I'm happy to be able to share a little bit about the work of the College Fund and the work of tribal colleges and universities. And I just want to take one moment here to remember my older sister. My older sister Ladora passed away several years ago at a very young age. She was only 58, but she had been a tribal college graduate when she was in her 50s. She had raised her family and was raising one of her granddaughters when she passed away unexpectedly. But she's an example, I think, of the success of tribal colleges and universities, that she was able, after her family was raised, to go to college and become a special education teacher. And today is her birthday. And she would be, I think, 81. So she was several years older than me. And I think about her every day. She was a person who just really had a good heart. And we spent a lot of time together, especially when I was older. And just being a person who was able to enjoy the experience of going to a tribal college and university and becoming a teacher, something she had always dreamed about doing. So I just want to acknowledge her. So, the purpose of these sessions is just to share about Native higher education with a particular focus on some of the areas that the College Fund spends time, putting our energy and our resources into, how different issues like affirmative action impact us, our students and our communities, how things like COVID impacted us, ways that the College Fund is supporting, Native students, not just at tribal colleges and universities, but all across Indian country. Indian education is in a crisis right now in higher education. We've seen a decline in enrollment, and I think it's really important for us to really deepen our understanding of higher education and the experience of Native students, and being able to share the work of the College Fund in that area is really important to me. I also just want to acknowledge that this is a really big topic. There's just lots of parts to it. So I hope that I'm able to just give you, a taste of what that experience is, and help you to understand and see ways that you can be supportive of that work. We have a Q&A box that you can go to it should be at the bottom of your Zoom, and you can type questions in there. I'll be able to see the questions and select some of them to answer. That I really appreciate it if you ask questions, because that allows me to kind of hone in on some of the kinds of issues that you may find particularly important. I want to talk a little bit about the College Fund first. I know many of you have had an introduction to the College Fund through our newsletters, or perhaps you have visited our website. But it's really, I think, valuable to just kind of put us all in the same place to summarize a little bit about what the College Fund does. And I want to put it in the context of the tribally controlled education movement, which was quite revolutionary. In the late 1960s, early 70s, Indigenous peoples were engaged in a renaissance around tribal identity, tribal self-governance, really kind of revitalizing the ways that we saw ourselves in society, and things that we could do to improve the quality of life in our communities. And during that time, many of the people in our different communities were very involved with kind of looking at how to have education belong to us, how to have education be something that was like a good experience, because so many of our people had experienced boarding schools, had been taken away from their families, didn't have the opportunity, to get the kind of education that they wanted, were often, unable to continue to speak their languages and participate with ceremonies and just engage in the kinship kind of nature of our communities. And so thankfully, with lots of prayer and lots of hard work in very under-resourced environments, the early tribal colleges started in the late 60s and 70s. And they became institutions that were really focused on how to provide a higher education that was culturally grounded, a higher education that really honored the identity and the experience of Native people, and gave us that opportunity to get the education that we needed to manage our own resources, teach our own children, work in our own healthcare. And at the same time, I want to acknowledge that there was a rise in the development of Native studies programming in mainstream institutions. So if you look at the development of Native education in the last 55, 60 years, you'll see that this kind of parallel and entwined development of education occurring in that environment. And so tribally controlled institutions, emerging in tribal community and being very place-based environments where they were able to, really honor and support the values and the needs of tribal communities. The tribal colleges at that time in the 70s joined together to form a membership association, the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. That consortium, still in existence, is the advocacy organization for the members. There are currently 34 accredited members of AHEC, and there are some emerging institutions. And in that time period, there was a lot of discussion about the fact that our institutions were heavily reliant on public funding, on particularly federal funding, because if you're familiar at all with tribal lands, can't really tax in those environments. And so the kinds of resources that many higher education institutions have access to, the tribal colleges didn't have. They needed to go and get their funding, from the federal government. So so there was always this vision of having a mechanism for letting people who wanted to support education, support Native people, have a pathway by which they could do that. And of course, the primary interest was how to support students and how to remove barriers to students' access and success. So a group of very visionary leaders of the tribal college movement and some allies were able to get together and start the college fund and chartered the college fund, or incorporated the college fund, to begin in 1989. Our primary focus is supporting Native students, not just with scholarships, but most importantly, by giving Native students access to supports that help them navigate the college experience. So the College Fund has a number of programs that we support students with, coaching them, giving them access to internships, helping them with mentoring, helping them navigate transfer experiences, helping them get into graduate school. We have a lot of services beyond the scholarships, and that just helps students with that navigating. We have services that we provide to help you even figure out if you want to go to college and what that experience might look like, and getting in that environment in our Pathways program, we call it. So we just do a lot of work in that area, and then we support the tribal colleges and universities themselves. And even in that space, our goal is to help tribal colleges and universities be really good stewards of the student experience and their community engagement missions. So tribal colleges, because of their, being these place-based institutions, really are in an environment where they need to be able to provide a myriad of resources and opportunities. So community education, literacy, all kinds of programming that occurs that allows them to just remain those centers of community that is so important to their work. So the College Fund, in our focus with tribal colleges and universities, looks at those areas. How do we support them so that students have success? And how do we support them so they have success serving the community? Some of the things that we're doing now, are directly related to both the success of the student and their ability of the colleges to work in community. One example that I'll share is our strategic enrollment management work. The tribal colleges are very under-resourced in environments where the socioeconomic conditions are very challenging, and we need to be able to help the colleges make the best use of the resources they do have access to. So being able to give the tribal colleges and universities supports with their strategic work is something I'm real happy that we're able to do. So we have a very robust strategic enrollment management initiative called Cultivating Native Student Success. We do it in partnership with AHEC, the membership organization, and other partners like Achieving the Dream. And that work is really aimed at helping TCUs move students into areas of learning that are important to their tribes. So that's an example of something that we do that is systemic. It's across the tribal college system. It supports everything about the tribal college mission. We have other things, though, that are more directed at specific student success initiatives. A good example is our financial fellowship program, which we just started, and we'll be selecting our first recipients of the financial fellowship program, which is a form of a scholarship program that the College Fund initiated. We realized that there were limited numbers of people who were Native people who were working in finance, banking, investment. So, and there are some people who are working in those fields. And so with their advice and support, we've created this financial fellowship program that right now will be a 4-year maximum program, but we hope eventually will be a 6-year maximum program to move a student through their undergraduate program into a master's, like an MBA or a master's in some banking or finance and related field. Right now, we're starting with a couple of fellows who will be entering their junior year, and we'll help them through their master's program. And what makes the fellowship different is not just the multi-year aspect of it, but we'll help them with mentoring and we'll help them with internship placements. So they'll get that professional exposure. And I see, for example, one of the questions is there an objective to help Native students prepare for a career in corporate America? Yes, there is an objective to do that. And part of that is achieved by helping students figure out what kind of career they want, and then what are the pathways or the resources that they need to do that. And this finance fellowship is, I think, a really good example of that. We have other similar examples, like we have a partnership with United Health, where we're able to educate a number of people who provide healthcare services in rural and tribal communities. And that has the same kind of aspects to it, where we give students that exposure to what college is like and then what a career might be, and connect them. As many of you maybe are aware, a lot of times our young people don't know what opportunities there are. So like we have another partnership with Disney, where Disney actually brings a group of students to visit their headquarters so they can see the variety of jobs that would be available to them as they pursue their career. So, those are just a couple of examples of things that people that we're doing at the College Fund. I think another really important point is for us to recognize that we're working in a dynamic community environment. So we have to, at the College Fund and in education, higher education, at the tribal colleges and at mainstream institutions, we have to be able to be responsive to the diversity of student experience and really equip ourselves with a variety of resources and relationships that will allow us to do that kind of work. So I wanted to make that point because I think sometimes people think, well, all Native people were maybe the same, or we have the same kind of aspirations or experiences, but in actuality, we have a diversity of experiences, rural, reservation, and urban. And so we need to be at the College Fund really responsive to being able to do that. I think also I'll just share a little bit about how funding occurs, because I see one of the questions is, whether there's partisan issues associated with the tribal colleges and with Native student education. And I would say that the thing about tribal education is it's a bipartisan environment. But the primary funding for tribal colleges and universities comes from the federal government. And so regardless of who's in office, the tribal colleges and tribal educators, we need to be able to navigate that environment and show the benefit of a college education to our people. And one of the things my team and I have talked about is that we recognize that in society today, there's a lot of fluctuations and viewpoints about higher education and its value. But in our communities, only about 12, I think it's closer to 14%. I apologize if I'm not great at remembering all the statistics, but it's close, around 14% of our people have a bachelor's degree or higher. And in the US, it's actually more like 30%. So that means that we have a big gap in, the qualified professionals, managers, business owners, people who would benefit from a college education for themselves and for their communities. And so college education is still of incredible value to us. We still need to be able to provide access to college to our people so that they can have, the resources that they need in order to successfully navigate that environment. So the College Fund's, focus in that area remains really important, even in light of shifting challenges around the value of higher education. I also want to acknowledge that a lot of our tribal colleges and a lot of our students, Native students across the country, still also engage in certificate and applied degree programs. So, man, you'll see the tribal colleges are just so amazingly diverse in that, they can offer short-term certificates, they'll offer 2-year degrees. About half of the tribal colleges offer 4-year degrees, and a number of them offer master's degrees. And we have a tribal college that's currently offering a PhD program. So you just have this incredible range of different kinds of academic and vocational programming at the tribal colleges, because they're the place where that kind of responsiveness is critical. And so I want to acknowledge that while we have that need for professional degrees and people to get their bachelor's degrees and become teachers and become nurses, we also have that need to train people for with certificate and applied science programming, vocational programming for other kinds of jobs that would be available in our communities. So I want to talk a little bit more. Just let me check a couple of the questions. So the declining enrollment, let me talk about that a little bit, because then I can talk about who our students are and what some of their experiences are and some of the ways that we support them. I think the declining enrollment can be attributed to a number of factors, one being the inadequacy of financial resources. Native students do not go to college for free. They have to pay for college regardless of where it's at. They have about 40% of our students or 48% of our students have dependents in their care. So, having sufficient financial resources to take care of their family is really critical. About a third of the students who receive scholarship support from the College Fund are single parents. So that also makes it really critical for them to be able to, have sufficient support to provide for their families, maybe childcare if their children are older, making sure that their children can engage in all those extracurricular activities that are so important to education. Our students tend to be older, so that means often that they have additional responsibilities that they have to navigate. Our students still are, many of them are still first generation students. And, if you're familiar with the experiences of first generation students, they often don't know how to navigate the college environment. I was a first generation college student, and I can remember walking past the main hallway where the business college was at the University of South Dakota, where I was in school, and not knowing that the name of the hall was what it was, because I didn't really have a college campus experience to be able to even know who to ask. So I think that, first generation college students, not only do we not know how to navigate things like financial aid or how to create a class schedule, but sometimes we don't really even know how to navigate the college campus. And so the College Fund works. We're one of the, I think, bigger contributors to helping students navigate that experience through our Pathways program. And if you go to our website, you see a lot of resources about how to navigate campus and how to get to campus. And that's something else that our team really does well, is supports career and college activities, career and college fairs. And we have through our Native Pathways program, we visit students and work with higher education institutions to help high school students identify their work. So I think that, just developing that understanding back to the federal funding. So the tribal colleges are primarily federally funded. There are very few tribal colleges that benefit from state funding. And that's important to understand, because we are citizens of the states that we reside in, and we educate a significant number of non-native people because of the rural location of our colleges. So I think even like about the college, my home community, Santa Glasgow University, a significant number of rural community members from, small farming and ranching communities or from farms and ranches attend the college and get teaching degrees or get nursing degrees because we're more accessible to them than driving 4 or 5 hours away or moving to live in another town across the state. So that's really important as well to understand that. That has a lot of value. I'm trying to see, I have my little list of things, and also the different questions that people are asking. The declining enrollment, I was mentioning the financial aid piece. I also think it's deeply connected to whether or not students feel welcome. So the College Fund and other organizations were very engaged in helping institutions understand how to create a sense of belonging. A few years ago, the College Fund worked with a number of educators and advocates, people from mainstream institutions, people from tribal colleges and universities, people from policy organizations, and created a declarations, a purpose for Native higher education, an equity report that gives a number of recommendations to higher education institutions on how to create a more inclusive environment. Everything from get out there into community to recruit students to your institution, to making sure that your faculty and your staff are knowledgeable about the unique experiences of Native students or Native people, and know how to help students if they need to navigate your campus environment. I think that's a very important piece. Another example, one of the other areas that we focus on at the College Fund that I did want to call some attention to is the huge gap in being able to support students in the financial space. That if we look at that closely, it's not just about supporting the student, but it's supporting that student's family, and it's ensuring that there's financial stability in the institution so that the institution is able to remain that sort of beacon of hope and light in communities that allows our students to do that. So the College Fund significantly invests in scholarship awarding, and last year, but there's still a huge gap. And so some of you have asked, like, how can you support us? Well, you can support scholarships. That is as I shared, our primary interest. And you can go to our website and you can see different ways that you can contribute, everything from, making a one-time to a monthly donation to, setting up a scholarship program to, remembering us in your estate planning. There's just different ways that you can do that, because we know that having financial support not only is meaningful from that money perspective, but students tell us all the time how deeply grateful they are that somebody sees them, as a person who's worth investing in. And they tell us at the College Fund that when we send them postcards and text messages, we invite them to our webinars, that they just appreciate that we see them as students and that we understand kind of where they're at. And we probably can only fund about 40% of the applicants that we get. And that's purely because we just don't have sufficient funding to fund 100%. And I know as a tribal college leader, we probably get applications from only about 10% of the students that attend or go to higher education across Indian country. So, there's probably about 108, 110,000 students, and we're maybe getting 11,000 applicants. So we just are, really aware of that big gap and feel real passionately about helping find resources so that students can access those kinds of resources. As you think about ways that you can support Indigenous communities and students beyond, contributing, I do think the declarations have some important things that you could look at. One thing I often tell people is you should ask what kind of education about Indigenous peoples is occurring in your child's school or at your alma mater. I use a couple of really good examples. if your government classes don't include tribal government as one of the other important governments in this country, then chances are the history and the contemporary experiences of Native people are not being included in your curriculum. I think that everybody benefits from that kind of diverse education, but for Native people to be able to be seen, there's some particular things like that, that kind of understanding and developing an understanding of, how we came to where we're at today as Native people and all the different kinds of policies and practices of the federal government and other influential policy environments, I think is really important because, it's kind of our way of being citizens together is to develop that understanding and that deeper knowledge about how things came about. How is it that Native people engaged in treaties? How come they did that? Well, they engaged in treaties because they have nation status as Indigenous people, and so they negotiated these treaties with the United States government. And then what resulted from that? And for our purposes, like visiting here today, a couple of things that resulted from that is that education became a greater federal responsibility. And so that kind of is foundational to us as we think about how to fund and support education. We think about that relationship as really being important. It also, I think, impacts the way that we advocate. So when we think about our community-based institutions, then we can recognize that that we are land-based institutions. And so our ability to make good use of the land resources that we have, and for the tribal colleges to be able to support that is really important, I think, as well. Let me see. I think if you're interested in internships, there's a question about that. We do have an internship program, and you can reach out to us, and we can connect you with our team members who work to develop paid internship opportunities for our students, because there's a variety of ways that students like to be able to engage with that. Let me see. I'm navigating the Q&A a little bit here. I think my team can put a link, if they haven't already, to the equity report, which is located on our website. So one of the other things that the College Fund does that I think is super exciting, and it's the academic in me, I started working in the tribal college movement in 1981. I had graduated from college and moved back to my home reservation with my older children, and I was looking for work, and there was a faculty position open at Santa Gleska College at the time. And I was able to teach business management classes because I had a business degree. And at that time, we also taught like secretarial courses and things like that. But it was really a good time in the tribal college environment. Many of the founders of the tribal colleges were still living at that time. And being able to hear their vision, their just deep desire, and the prayerful way that they approached education was just a wonderful experience for me. And I've worked in the tribal colleges or with K-12 education ever since, and get to witness the transformative experience that our people have with education. I mentioned my sister earlier, but I see that in, people I'm related to. I see it across Indian country, just what happens to us when we're able to empower ourselves by accessing education is just remarkable. It's just transformative, and it creates generational change. And there's a lot of conversations when we look at economic outcomes, and there's talk about generational wealth. And it occurred to me the other day when I thought about my other sister who got a teaching degree and taught for, I want to say 34 years, but definitely, between 34 and 37 years. She taught, and then her kids graduated from college, and now her grandkids have graduated from college and are in college, and that is generational wealth. She was an inspiration to them, and created that pathway for all of them to see themselves as college students, and to see themselves in really successful ways. And so when I think about that life-saving experience of education, I just feel really thankful and grateful for the founders who really had that vision that we could have an education that was meaningful to our communities and to us. And so being able to do that kind of advocacy, through the College Fund is just also really rewarding. I've also seen that the tribal colleges, when we think of like our sustainability as institutions, one of the most important things that we do is we just remain very responsive to the communities and the priorities of our tribes. So we have a need right now, for example, just like I think the rest of the country, to fill the gap in the number of teachers that we have. And so the College Fund has a teacher education program that looks at how can we build the capacity of the tribal colleges to help students at different transition points in their pathway to getting their teaching certificate. So develop your interest. We help you think about, do you want to be a teacher? If you do want to be a teacher, get into college and take your first couple of years of college experience, and make sure that the tribal colleges have a practicum that lets you try out teaching, so that you can see if that is in fact something that you want to do, then help you transition into teacher education program. And then when you graduate, help you pass whatever kind of certification requirements exist in the states that you're going to teach in. So oftentimes it's a test maybe, or it could be a portfolio. But the College Fund's teacher ed program helps students kind of in all of those different transition places that they have, and helps them with basic needs that they have. Transportation, childcare, buy their textbooks, those kinds of things that make a really big difference for a student to be able to do that. So we have a lot of different examples, I think, of those kinds of things that are in our communities. A lot of the tribal colleges offer business programs, so students join, business clubs and develop business plans and develop their own businesses. We have a lot of emphasis in natural resources, environmental science, and a lot of interest in climate change, which is really seriously impacting the well-being of everyone, and including our very vulnerable tribal communities. So we like to be able to ensure that we stay in that space, but we also like to make sure that we help students at their different transition points to go to college. A couple of other things that I wanted to mention that I think are really important is that we still have a lot of students for whom the high school experience just doesn't align with them. And I had this privilege to spend about 4 years as the chief educational officer, which is like the equivalent of being the superintendent of our tribal school. And one thing that I realized in that experience, and as a mother and a grandmother, is that oftentimes when a student is really struggling in high school, it's because the high school just experience isn't for them. And so I recognize that. I'd like for every student to graduate from high school, but if you can't, if for some reason you need a different pathway, then the tribal colleges are also there with our high school equivalency programming. So where we can help a student or a person become a college student, or get their high school equivalency that many people think of the GED when they think of that. There are others like the HiSET test. Do that and go into college. And if you go to the College Fund website, there's some really wonderful blog stories about students who did their high school equivalencies and see themselves now in college. So I think that's really inspiring to think that we're able to create those other kinds of pathways so that students can go to a tribal college, or they can go to college, wherever they want, whatever fits for them. I think that's really important. A few other questions. So the federal funding did start in the 1970s. It was a long process where tribal colleges worked closely with, at that time, Navajo Community College, which is now Dene College. Navajo Community College had been successful in getting federal funding for their institution, and the tribal colleges, the early tribal colleges, joined together and navigated the congressional experience to create the Tribally Controlled Community College Assistance Act that provides funding to tribal colleges and universities, and tribal colleges and universities that are accredited participate with other federal programming, like Title III. Tribal colleges are land grant institutions, so they're able to get USDA funding, National Science Foundation, different things like that. And like I shared earlier, some states are supportive of tribal colleges, navigating, particularly when tribal colleges are interested in creating career pathways, because they're, because tribal colleges are rural and regional usually, then they're able to contribute from that kind of economic perspective as well. Let's see. So that answers the question about kind of when we got that funding, and we continue to advocate for, and we often ask our supporters to, reach out to their congressional people to advocate for tribal colleges and universities, just to make sure that we have broad support and recognize the incredible contributions of the colleges. There are very few, there are no tribal colleges really on the East Coast or in the southeastern states. The furthest east, we do have colleges in Wisconsin and Michigan, Oklahoma. I think that tribally controlled institutions, have to be chartered by tribes. So the tribes do have to step up to be able to do that. Our emphasis is on undergraduate degrees. That's true. Certificate, 2-year, 4-year degrees, but we do have a number of ways that we support graduate degrees as well. And I think, there's that increased desire to ensure that people get professional degrees, because we do have assets and resources and things like that we need to manage. Let's see. I think that the other couple of areas that I want to talk about, I think that being able as an organization that supports Native students, regardless of where they go to college, continues to be really one of the most important areas that we work on. So that being able to understand how students navigate the college experience is also something that we do. And when I was talking earlier about the vision of our founders, one of the visions that all of us have had is that we'd be able to tell our story really well. And I'm really proud of the fact that the College Fund is one of the leading research organizations when it comes to Native higher education. So if you can also see on our website a number of reports about the impact of tribal colleges. We did a study with Gallup, the Gallup Purdue Index, a few years ago that looked at the alumni of tribal colleges, and in all areas, and I like to emphasize this because in all areas of well-being, tribal college and university alumni scored higher than Native students who attended other institutions who also scored well. And both groups scored higher than the general population. Why is that? It's because tribal colleges and universities and institutions that provide Indigenous supports for students help students by emphasizing their identity and their wellness as the resources that they need to have to navigate whatever experiences life gives them. Talking to a colleague the other day, I said, in America, we talk about grit and determination, but Indigenous people, we talk about using our cultural knowledge to navigate the world and using our cultural understandings to be good relatives and to be able to, live in that kind of space and use that kind of knowledge and kind of navigate and translate in that space is really a good thing to have, a good experience. Let's see. Nancy Joe's typing an answer to a concerning drop off in donation revenue. I think she can address that in her role leading our resource development efforts. It's a challenging time, I think. There are lots of things that are going on in the world, and like many many people are really focused on how they can navigate their own experience. I think my team is answering a lot of questions live, and so then they're dropping off of my Q&A. So I'm just going to go back to my notes here and make sure that I've covered the kinds of things that I wanted to talk about today. I think that the other thing I'll share is that the College Fund has some really amazing resources for students. So, you don't have to be a Native student to benefit from the College Fund's resources. You can go to our student pages on our website, and you can make use of our Native Pathways book that really explains how to get into and navigate college. You can take advantage of our career pathways resources. We have a lot of like the research reports that I shared with you. So don't actually have to be a Native student to benefit from the different resources that we have that can help you navigate college. And I often tell people, take advantage of those resources. They're free and they're easily accessible, and they're very attractive, particularly for young people. I think they would find them really accessible. So if you have young people in your family, please make sure that they access those things because you don't have to be a Native student to benefit from that information. We had some really nice comments about how tribal college students, how tribal colleges really help students feel welcome. And I think that that's true also of mainstream institutions where a place is created for Native students to be with each other and to be seen by their community. One of the nice things about tribal colleges, I used to say, if you if you go to a tribal colleges, highly likely that your auntie works there, or another family member. And among Native people, so oftentimes you don't even have to be a blood relative to be called a relative. And I think that that's one of the advantages of the tribal colleges as well. There is a lot of turnover, that's mentioned by one of the attendees. Tribal colleges are not, they are rural, and there's limited housing availability and limited social resources. So I do think that unless you're from the community, it can be sometimes challenging to try to figure out how to navigate that social environment and that geography. We're really interested at the College Fund and are studying right now, what does it mean to grow your own faculty, to identify people in your community that want to stay in community and perhaps want to teach. I think of my own self. I wanted to stay in community, and teaching, being a faculty member, let me do that for years before I moved into other leadership roles. So I think, what caused that was I wanted to live in community and be near my family. So I think if we can, develop a robust faculty development program that does the grow your own, I think we do a lot to help retain faculty and staff at our institutions. Let's see. So the next time we get together, I'm going to be talking about some of the issues related to the affirmative action decision by the Supreme Court of the United States, and some of the implications of that, some of the effect that we're seeing on kind of the dampening of student engagement with college. We'll be taking a look at some of the other things that have happened. If you're not involved in higher education, you may not be aware that problems with filing the financial aid form, the FAFSA, has caused some serious issues around the student enrollment and matriculation opportunities. So we'll be talking about that. And then I'll be talking a little bit more about the what's happened since COVID. The pandemic had an incredibly devastating impact on tribal communities, and there was a significant investment of federal dollars into our tribal communities, including our tribal colleges. And now those dollars are no longer available. So what are the tribal colleges doing to respond to that, and how is the College Fund supporting that? We'll be kind of moving through those issues over the next couple of sessions. Let me see if I can answer this final question, or it looks like Nancy Joe's answering that. Is there anything else, team? Are there tribal colleges that have state programs? Well, TANF and SNAP are actually not administered through tribal colleges. Those are usually administered through social service programs at the state or tribal level. Certainly our students are eligible if they meet the income and residency and other kinds of requirements. So, we would participate with those kinds of things. If there are subjects in the tribal colleges, Nancy Joe's typing an answer to that. I don't think we do have virtual programming at the tribal colleges. Most of the time, those courses are provided, by local faculty. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And I hope you'll join us at our next session. And if you have additional questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us. We'll make sure that we include them. And again, thank you very much for joining us.